Welcome to Eye on America. I'm Michelle Miller. Today we examine issues concerning public safety around the country. In Nebraska, we hear from experts raising the alarm that road barricades aren't strong enough against heavier electric vehicles. And in California, we speak to an anthropologist whose new book offers firsthand accounts from human smugglers helping people cross into the U.S. illegally. But we begin with an issue worrying children, parents, and educators nationwide: school shootings. There have been almost 200 incidents of gunfire on school grounds since the start of this year. Jim Axelrod reflects on our nation's troubling history of school shootings and our seeming inability to put an end to the tragedies.
So now we've got a new name atop the hideous list.
He was a very sweet kid. He did not deserve this. Neither did the coach or everyone else.
Winder, Georgia joins Columbine, Newtown, Uvalde, and hundreds of others with traumatized children.
You can hear gunshots like just ringing out through the school, and you're just wondering which one of those is going to be somebody that you're best friends with or somebody that you love.
And parents who rushed to campus not knowing if they would hug their kids or bury them.
I just dropped everything and sprinted to the car. He got a bullet hole from one side of his backpack to the other side.
Winder, Georgia.
The gunshots were so close to me, my ears started ringing real bad.
A new name that's shorthand for senseless tragedy. Because it's been such a steady drumbeat in the news cycle for so many years, it might be easy to lose sight of the dimensions of the school shooting epidemic. Since Columbine, a quarter century ago, there have been 388 deadly school shootings in the United States, killing at least 526 people. Let that sink in.
But as a nation, we cannot continue to accept the carnage of gun violence.
We've endured too many of these tragedies in the past few years.
Pick your president.
Our nation is shocked and saddened by the news of the shootings at Virginia Tech today.
Even your decade. It's been a problem with no solution.
Perhaps now America would wake up to the dimensions of this challenge, and we could prevent anything like this from happening again.
Well, apparently we can't. Angel Garza told us that in the days after he lost his 10-year-old Amory Joe in Uvalde.
Nothing's gonna change. I mean, this always happens in a small town. Nobody expects anything bad to happen, and then it happens, and everybody wants to make changes to prevent it from happening, and then it dies down a little bit, and then it happens again, and then it's a cycle.
Whoever first defined insanity as doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result wasn't talking about school shootings. But think about it. Insanity. What better word is there to describe where we are?
We continue with our look at the gun violence epidemic affecting our nation. More than 27,000 Americans died from suicide by firearm in 2023. Nicole Skanga introduces us to one gun store owner whose unconventional offer to help a struggling friend sparked an unexpected movement.
Not many mental health movements begin inside a gun store.
This safe is life-saving.
Yes, ma'am, without a doubt.
The story of why the rustic renegade came to care for hundreds of other people's firearms begins with this Iraqi war vet's return home.
You failed at being a civilian.
In my mind, I did. And I couldn't find my purpose if I wasn't a soldier, because my identity was wrapped up in what I did.
Caleb Morse left behind 13 years of service for civilian life and opened up a gun shop in his native Louisiana. That's when purpose arrived on his doorstep in the form of an old Army pal.
One day he just shows up and he's like, hey, I don't want my guns anymore. Life really sucks right now. Is there anything you can do to help me? And I'm like, well, I can hold on to your firearms if it's that bad. I'll give them back to you whenever you say you're good.
Word got out.
More and more vets showed up saying, hey, look, I'm in a bad spot.
Major depressive disorder with psychotic features, anxious distress, panic disorder, PTSD.
These men agreed to speak with us anonymously about their struggles with suicidal thoughts.
It got really bad really fast.
At what point did you start thinking about, I've got firearms?
When the thought crossed my mind, I didn't want to be here anymore.
They found a lifeline in Morse.
The next morning, I called Caleb and said, I need you to come get my guns. And he showed up.
I've lost more friends to suicide than I did in combat.
Suicide by firearm is a uniquely fatal epidemic, with roughly 90% of attempts lethal.
From 2002 to 2021, nearly 87,000 veterans died by gun suicide. That's 16 times the number of service members killed in action over the same period.
I've worked at the VA for 17 years.
So when the VA piloted the Armory Project, a suicide prevention program built around Louisiana gun shops, research investigator Gala True immediately phoned Caleb Morse.
The number one thing that comes up all across the country for firearm retailers is this concern about civil liability.
The two set out to pioneer a bill, legally shielding gun store owners who agree to hold on to firearms.
A Good Samaritan law, where if you're really trying to help someone and you do everything, within the bounds of the law, you shouldn't lose your business.
Senator Caffey, yes.
The bipartisan measure passed unanimously in Louisiana in 2022. There's now a similar law in Montana.
Some of these are collectible firearms.
To date, Caleb Morse has stored and restored over 400 firearms for roughly 50 gun owners.
There's no way I would be here without Caleb.
If firearm storage was a reality in all 50 states, what would this country look like?
We're already the greatest nation. Man, we could be so much better.
A collection unlike any other in America, powered by one man's promise to do right by others.
Coming up, inside the city of Los Angeles' plans to clear homeless people from the street. This is Eye on America. Welcome back. A Supreme Court ruling this past summer gives local governments the authority to ban people from sleeping and camping on public property. Critics argue the ruling does nothing to solve the ongoing homelessness crisis. Adam Yamaguchi looks into a new program in Los Angeles that could provide a long-term solution.
This is Coley King's mobile exam room.
We want to be there for them.
4 days a week in Los Angeles, the street doctor with the Venice Family Clinic makes house calls to those without homes.
We saw you, and really the last time was 2021. And then after that, we kind of lost track. We lost contact, so here you are.
53-year-old Melissa is one of more than 45,000 people experiencing homelessness in the city of Los Angeles.
There are patients that suffer from very serious medical illnesses. There are patients that have schizophrenia, have HIV. So I think there's urgency from everyone to solve this.
Nearly half of all Americans living on the streets are here in California, where there was roughly one shelter bed for every 3 people who needed one last year.
It's time to move with urgency at the local level to clean up these sites.
Leaders like California Governor Gavin Newsom were empowered to take action in clearing encampments after the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that cities could ban people from sleeping outside.
There are no longer any excuses.
Easy to say, perhaps, but the reality is more complicated.
The goal has got to be to solve the problem.
Karen Bass is the mayor of Los Angeles.
Our problem here is we don't have enough housing. We need to build. We need to purchase buildings.
And that's where she's focused, getting people off the streets and into shelter that up until now did not exist. She's doing it by leveraging empty motels and city-owned properties with the goal of moving people indoors urgently and clearing encampments permanently.
You don't solve anything by clearing an encampment and just moving them to the next street.
So far, since 2022, her Inside Safe program has brought more than 3,000 people indoors from over 60 encampments. And the city has seen a drop in street homelessness.
This area right here, many months ago, was filled with tents. And you can imagine what family wants to bring their kids here right there if this is filled with tents and you're afraid of the people that are here. And look at it now.
Jessica has been unsheltered since 2019. Just days after we met her, she was placed in interim housing.
I should be able to get some more rest, but this has been very stressful.
Others, like Brian, are still waiting.
It's hard to be on camera showing this.
We're dealing with massive numbers, so it is going to take a while. I wish I could tell you that on this date, this problem would be ended. I can't do that. But what I do know is that if we continue along with the trajectory that we're headed on, we will be able to solve this problem.
It's an approach that could also solve a problem for Dr. King.
You may lose contact with people unless there's a plan in place.
Absolutely. We may lose them, and we may lose them forever because they are that sick. I have faith that here we're already on that pathway to try to do this the right way.
A crisis decades in the making, changing one day, one life at a time.
We turn our focus to roadway safety, where new testing is raising concerns about whether guardrails can handle the impact of electric vehicles. These barricades are typically designed to take on cars that weigh up to 5,000 pounds, but many EVs weigh significantly more than traditional gas-powered vehicles, resulting in more severe crashes. Chris Van Cleve shows us how those consequences could prove to be deadly.
Early on a Sunday morning in January, this 2021 Tesla slammed into a guardrail on Interstate 405 in Irvine, California. The vehicle appears to have careened off the roadway and broken through the barrier, leaving behind mangled metal and killing the driver. Now, new testing is raising questions if the safety infrastructure lining U.S. roads is strong enough to handle impacts from electric vehicles, which tend to be heavier than their gas-powered counterparts. Tests showing EVs tearing through the guardrail, or here essentially lifting a similar barrier and passing below it. University of Nebraska professor Cody Stoley.
Unfortunately, these guardrail systems, which have performed very well with gasoline vehicles historically, do not appear to be containing electric vehicles when impacting with similar types of conditions.
In July, Stoley's team rammed this 7,000-pound electric pickup into concrete barriers commonly used as freeway medians at 62 miles an hour. Weighing 2,000 pounds more than a gas-powered pickup, the barriers contained the collision, but chunks of concrete were sent flying, and several of the 5,000-pound barriers were pushed back 10 feet, 50% more than normal.
Does something need to change with how, whether it's the rules around guardrails or when new ones are put in?
There has to be an awareness, so we're trying to create awareness for that so that there can be more research done, and not just on guardrails, but also on barriers.
Nebraska Senator Deb Fisher.
When you went into this testing, did you expect to see what you saw?
It was eye-opening. There was a lot of damage, and again, if there would have been vehicles on the other side of that barrier, we would have seen a severe accident.
More than 19,000 people died in crashes where their vehicle left the roadway last year. That's nearly half of all traffic deaths. Guardrails and similar roadway barriers are designed to reduce the number and severity of these crashes. This is how a guardrail is supposed to work, containing a vehicle and redirecting it back towards the road. But watch what happens when an electric sedan hits a standard guardrail. During this new testing from the Texas Transportation Institute, the guardrail fails as the sedan rips through. The Insurance Institute for Highway Safety says it is concerned about EV's additional weight resulting in more severe crashes, a concern NTSB Chair Jennifer Hamady told CBS News she shares.
I think it does present significant challenges for safety.
In March, Senator Fisher asked Chair Hamady about EVs and guardrails during a Senate hearing.
Our guardrails, crash attenuators, they are rated up to 5,000 pounds. Many of these vehicles go up to 10,000 pounds. So that has an impact on safety.
The EPA estimates half of all new car sales could be EVs by 2032. Not much time to raise the bar on roadside safety barriers.
Ahead, a rare glimpse inside the dangerous business of human smuggling. That story is next. We conclude with a look into the many ways migrants enter our country. Jason de Leon is an anthropologist and executive director of the Undocumented Migration Project, a nonprofit that raises awareness about issues faced by immigrants around the world. His new book tells us the stories of the human smugglers who facilitate these often perilous operations. Dana Jacobson spoke with the professor about his decades-long work, chronicling this complex issue.
These are items that were collected over the years that migrants had left behind.
Anthropologist Jason DeLeon spent 5 years combing the Sonoran Desert in Arizona for his research on migration.
This literally looks like a lost and found in front of me.
This person was out there in, kind of cheap knockoff Nikes, and the soles have come, it gets so hot, the glue on your shoes will come apart. She's taken a bra strap for one and tried to reattach it on one end, and then a shoelace on the other to keep
Just to
going.
keep the sole of her shoe.
Yeah.
DeLeon is the director of the Coatson Institute of Archaeology at UCLA. He's also the executive director of the Undocumented Migration Project.
In the beginning, people were very dismissive of the stuff. They called it trash, garbage. They said,
A nonprofit that raises awareness about issues faced by migrants around the world. Like the federal U.S. border policy known as Prevention Through Deterrence, which created more restrictions at urban border crossings.
Thousands of people have died in the Arizona desert, in the South Texas backwoods since 1994 because of this policy that's funneling them to these places in hopes that if you have to walk 7 days across a desert, you'll be deterred, possibly by death, which is why the role of smuggling becomes so important to get you through this gauntlet.
DeLeon first became interested in migration as an undergrad at UCLA, majoring in anthropology.
What are the questions that we're asking, and what perspectives can we use to understand?
He's spent the last 16 years teaching, while still finding time to keep learning about migration issues. His latest endeavor, a 7-year journey following human smugglers, also known as coyotes. First meeting them along the train tracks in southern Mexico. Part of the migrant path some take via freight train.
Almost everybody confuses human trafficking and human smuggling. And they're two very different things, right? Someone who is trafficked has it happen against their will. Someone who is smuggled is paying someone to move them across a geopolitical boundary.
DeLeon shares the stories of some of those smugglers in his latest book, Soldiers and Kings.
These guys early on said to me, they said, "Oh, you had written this book about migrants. Why don't you talk to us?" Nobody ever asks us these questions. Nobody ever wants to hear our stories. And so I said, I'm here.
Do you think you had their trust right away?
After a few days, yes. The thing that always creates that trust, I think, for me, is when you come back. So I spent months with these guys, and then I said, I'm going to come back again. And when I ended up coming back again, they were like, "Oh, you weren't lying." And then that's when things really started to pick up, and then suddenly a million doors opened up for me.
One smuggler featured in the book is Roberto, a young man from Honduras attempting to get out of the business, who allowed DeLeon to interview him on camera.
And he had come from this long story of just violence in his life, and everything was sort of stacked against him. And yet he was so hopeful and really was trying to find a better way forward and get away from this whole business of smuggling. And in his attempts to do that, he gets murdered by someone else who I had been working with. It was such a heartbreaking thing.
Hearing the empathy that you have for someone that I think most people would say, how do you have empathy for someone who is a human smuggler?
Part of my goal as an anthropologist is to create empathy and to have people understand that the world is a difficult place for most people. And we have these very simplistic understandings about these things. And I really wanted to complicate that.
The business of human smuggling, according to the Department of Homeland Security, is a multi-billion-dollar industry run by criminal organizations intent on taking advantage of vulnerable people. The story DeLeon tells is more complex.
I can write a story about how they're the bad guys in this whole scenario and all they do is brutalize migrants. But if you think about the realities of it, if smugglers only brutalized migrants, the system wouldn't function. And so I went into it telling myself that, what can I find that's relatable? It's not trying to humanize smugglers. It's working from the assumption that they are human first, and that they just happen to be in this brutal occupation.
I think what you write, it's violent, it exploits people, but that it's also a symptom of a larger problem. What is that larger problem?
We need to think about why are people migrating in the first place? And why does the United States have an insatiable appetite for cheap, undocumented labor that we rarely acknowledge? And as long as you need the labor, and as long as climate is changing and making places unlivable, those smugglers are gonna stay in business and just make more money off of this whole process.
It's an industry that continues to grow as migrant encounters at the U.S.-Mexico border hit record highs, with people coming from as far away as Africa, the Middle East, and Asia.
People are coming from around the globe. They're coming up from South America through the Darien Gap. It's a window into the future. As all those places become unlivable for different reasons, we're going to continue to see that, that mix of people coming up from the south to our doorstep.
A future De Leon hopes can be made easier by considering different perspectives and the humanity of everyone involved.
The approaches that we've been using to deal with these problems have clearly been ineffective for decades, and yet we just don't seem to want to get smarter about this stuff. I hope with this book that it's a way to undermine the simplistic framings of what the problem actually is. You can build whatever border wall you want. There are desperate people on the other side who are willing to die to save themselves, to save their family, and then there are smugglers who are willing to make a buck on that in all kinds of different ways. And so that will just keep the system going forever.
For more stories like these and live coverage of breaking news, stream us right here on CBS News 24/7. I'm Michelle Miller. Thank you for watching Eye on America.